Illuminaughtii could go to jail. And hey, I'm not actually joking. There is a lot of things that I've been looking at over the last few days, a lot of research that I've been doing into a lot of legal documents, and I have kind of come to this conclusion that, yeah, regardless of what happens in Illuminauttii's massive ongoing lawsuit with Oz Media and others, things could just be outright over for Illuminaughtii in terms of her business, but also in terms of her not being in a jail cell. And it just kind of feels that right now, and honestly for the last year, this Illuminaughtii situation is just turning into a massive car crash. And look, I love a good car. No, I don't love a good. I love a good social media car crash. And this is definitely one of those, if not the finest example of a social media car crash. And what kind of fascinates me about all of this is that this all started from one singular tweet. And I think the best part about that really still makes me laugh is that Blair, she started this whole thing off by accusing, of all people, a famous lawyer of plagiarism. It's just a case of, what did you actually think was going to happen? But yeah, 5,000 exposed videos later, one abandoned YouTube channel, and a lawsuit that never seems to be ending, things right now are absolutely looking even worse for Blair. And in today's video, what I want to basically do is go through every single update that's happened since my last video of, updating you guys on this situation. And this video, honestly, is probably one of the biggest ones out of all of the ones that I've done throughout this entire saga, because yes, things in the recent legal updates are not looking good. And whilst Oz has come out with a video explaining that pretty much this legal case could be over and done with within the next few weeks or month, I'm here to say that regardless of that, this whole situation could affect Blair for pretty much the rest of her life, and that is shown in multiple things that we're going to go through. And yes, I think the best place to start is the legal documents. And I understand legal talk and legal discussion can be a little bit boring, so I'm gonna, try and translate everything in this massive legal document in my own way. I've done a lot of research into this. If you're wondering why it's taken me so long to, actually make this video, it's because there's a lot of legal talk that I've had to do a lot of research into, kind of understanding and just making sense of what's actually been said in this document. But also, before we get into the document, could you please subscribe to the YouTube channel? Thank you very much. But yes, this 35-page document that I received from Madcatster starts off with, "This court, upon consideration of defendant Oz's motion to join parties on cross-claim and response and rely briefs filed related thereto, grants the motion. Defendant Oz is granted to leave to join as additional parties, John Doe, 9 Point Holdings, blah, 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 blah. It is so ordered." And I understand the question to a lot of you will be, well, what does any of that mean? And yeah, I understand there are some things in this document where I do just kind of read it and I'm like, could you not just write this in a more simple way? It almost feels like they're trying to be complex for the sake of complex. But I have, transcribed some things from this document in my own way, and here is what's basically being said there. Basically, from my analysis, I can see that the defendant is adding more parties to their cross-claim to make the point that these parties are also responsible for issues in this case. This helps the defendant Oz potentially reducing their own liability, clarifying responsibility in the case, and strengthening their own legal position by involving everyone that they believe to be connected in this dispute. Basically, it's a pretty smart move in my opinion, as it does strengthen Oz's position in this lawsuit, but also it does kind of take some responsibility away from them, and also helps the court in general just understand what is actually going on in this case. By bringing more parties into the equation, it kind of allows more pieces to be added into the puzzle, and more of an understanding can kind of happen from what is actually being said throughout this entire document. And yes, I understand if that sounds a little bit confusing. I'm also a little bit confused. And also, if you're a lawyer or a legal student listening to me right now and you're like, what is he talking about? All I can say is I'm sorry. I've tried to do the research. But yes, seemingly this has all been agreed to, as you can see in the certificate of conferral, where it says, "The undersigned counsel for defendant Oz certifies that prior to filing this motion, he met and confirmed with plaintiffs concerning the relief request herein. The conferral between counsel began following the filing on July 29 by defendant Oz of his counterclaims and third-party complaints." Basically, in English, what this actually means is Oz's lawyers met up with Blair's lawyers. They had a conversation about all of this, and shockingly enough, Blair's lawyers obviously opposed it. Through the course of Consol's discussions, the lawyers for Oz conceded that the purported third-party complaint was improperly brought pursuant to CRCP 14, and that such claims were more appropriately brought as a cross-claim complaint pursuant to CRCP 13G and H, and that a motion to leave to join additional parties pursuant to CRCP 20 would be in order. Counsel for plaintiffs, i.e. Blair, will oppose this motion. And again, I completely understand if you're very confused to what anything I just said means, because honestly, I also am a little bit confused, but I have transcribed this again in my own way. Basically, from my own legal analysis, this basically means that Oz's lawyers acknowledge that they have actually made a filing under an incorrect rule, and they have actually admitted to this and changed the ruling to the correct one, so the claim can be filed correctly and no issues ensue later in this case. And this is quite interesting to me because this is a case of Oz's lawyers clearly taking a level of accountability and admitting that yes, they made a mistake in this part of the document and they are willing to amend this and change the mistake that they made here. And honestly, I think that this is a pretty respectable thing to do. As we've seen throughout this entire legal case over the last year, Blair's lawyers have made countless mistakes in my opinion, yet they are never willing to admit to any of those mistakes whatsoever, but it is very clear that Oz's lawyers are willing to admit that on the occasion they have made an error and they are willing to fix that. And whilst I don't really think this is significant in the terms of how this case will, eventually conclude, I do think that this is clearly a sign that the lawyers on Oz's side are very respectable and they are also willing to take accountability, which is quite ironic considering Blair's history of never taking any accountability whatsoever and blaming absolutely everybody else for everything other than herself. But yeah, then after this, the document goes on to list just basically a bunch of updates to the timeline of everything that's taken place in regards to extensions, what the court has granted and didn't grant. Nothing particularly interesting for you guys, but this is where it starts to get into the spicy things. Defendant Oz's amended counterclaim and cross-complaint and demand for jury trial. And this is where we start to approach the territory that I mentioned earlier of where Blair could possibly face jail time in the future because of some of the things that have taken place in the recent updates in this legal case, and in particular, this section right here. And my friends, this is like genuinely monumental for this case. So this section here obviously mentions a counterclaim from Oz, which basically translates to Oz's lawyers are arguing that Blair has caused some level of harm against Oz in the past or during this case, and they believe that because of this, the resolution can only be some level of relief, which translates to Oz seemingly is now countersuing Blair, which obviously is absolutely massive. But the biggest thing that truly adds to the magnitude of what is going on in this case is the fact that they have requested a jury trial, which may not seem that big to you, but basically what this means is obviously right now, this whole lawsuit is going to be resolved and concluded by the judge's decision, and Oz's lawyers are requesting that that doesn't actually happen, and instead, the conclusion and response to what actually is going on in this case, what the final answer is going to be, will be taken out by a jury. Now, I should just say, this is only a request for this, but if it was granted, that would be absolutely massive. Because with a judge, there seems to be a bit of a lack of empathy when it comes to the final rulings in court cases. And this mainly comes from the fact that one individual is making a final ruling, a final conclusion to everything that they have seen in this trial. And also a judge is obviously going to be more experienced when it comes to law than a, regular jury, which would genuinely just be a group of people from the public making their, decision or understanding of what they think the situation actually is. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is with one judge, obviously empathy can come into things, but when you have a jury, it's going to be a whole group of individuals with different thought processes, different brains, and different feelings, which means that they will analyze this situation not just from a legal perspective, but more from an empathetic perspective. And with this case, I would not be shocked if the jury saw this case and just thought to themselves, this is nothing other than a millionaire businesswoman using the court system to bully their ex partner, but also to go after anybody else that has ever spoken against them in the past and use the court system to outright silence those individuals by financially and emotionally crippling them. So obviously this is absolutely massive. And I think honestly this is a really good play from Oz's lawyers because they obviously acknowledge that a jury is going to be far more empathetic than a singular judge, but they also know that yes, a jury isn't really going to go by the books and everything. They're not necessarily going to have as much legal expertise in the legal system as a judge would, and that's not to say that Oz has done something wrong legally, but when it comes to finer details that Blair's lawyers may try to exploit in this case, I think overall empathy will trump that, and that's why they have made this request. But yeah, moving into the actual claims made, it starts to speak about parties, jurisdiction, and venue. In the first line specifically noting that the defendant Oz resides in Colorado, which pretty much just establishes the jurisdiction for the claim to be in Colorado, and it also states that Oz's lawyers are seeking to quiet title the property that has been mentioned throughout all of these documents. And somehow if you've been following this case for this long and you don't know what this actually references to, pretty much this is about the house that Oz lives in. And at one point of time, Blair tried to foreclose this house as a way, in my opinion and a lot of other people's opinion, to silence Oz, to pretty much say, hey, I can do whatever I want, I can ruin your life financially, I can take away your home if you tread on my toes. And yes, what this part of the document seeks to do is pretty much resolve the dispute of who actually owns this property and to resolve the validity of the deeds of trust recorded against the property. And with this alone, you can kind of see why Oz's lawyers have put in a request to have a trial by jury, because obviously a millionaire businesswoman trying to foreclose a non-millionaire's house does not necessarily look like the most moral thing. Even if necessarily in the legal perspective, Blair, wasn't exactly in the wrong in this situation. I'm not saying morally, it was right, but I'm saying the legal system may look at this and think, oh, she had every right to do this. But if we're talking morals, which a jury definitely plays into in terms of empathy, I think that they will see this part of the document and think to themselves, this is clearly a case of a bitter ex bullying their ex and trying to silence them and ruin their life. Because pretty much that's what this entire court case is. Blair trying to ruin the lives of multiple individuals that she is no longer close with. It's genuinely one of the most sick and twisted things that I think I've ever seen on social media. And trust me, I have covered a lot of things on social media, a lot of different, takes, things that have happened in the news. But this lawsuit, the fact that it has gone on for so long and the debate of who actually owns this property is still ongoing, to me just states that Blair really is not a good person. And I do think that a jury would also have pretty much the same opinion as me. Because let's be real, what normal human being is going to see millionaire trying to make someone homeless and think, oh yeah, that's a good and moral thing to do? I really don't think anybody would think that. But then going back to the sections that I just mentioned, establishing the jurisdiction, as I said, basically means that everything in this case will now be under Colorado law, due to this being where the debated property resides. And based into my research of why they have set the jurisdiction in Colorado, I don't think it's because that there is some special law that could help them in the state of Colorado. I just think that this is a case of Oz lives in Colorado, he's probably hired lawyers in Colorado, and they are more familiar with Colorado law. And by setting the jurisdiction as Colorado, it basically prevents Blair from hiring any other lawyers from outside other states and setting the jurisdiction in that state and using laws that Oz's lawyers may not understand because they are trained in Colorado law. Basically, it just benefits Oz because they already have an understanding of this specific piece of law, and they don't want to get bamboozled by some other state laws coming into the equation and confusing them, as they are not well researched into that specific law. I think a good analogy for this would be they speak a certain language, they're fluent in, say, Spanish, and they don't necessarily want to speak in French because they're not fluent in French. I think that makes sense. But yes, moving away from all of the jurisdictions and slightly boring bits, we then get into the more juicy stuff that I know that you blood-sucking vampires are all here for. And that is the factual allegations. And my friends, this is where things start to just get absolutely crazy. Some of the things stated in the factual allegations really do shock me because, as I said earlier, it very much does play into the fact that Blair could possibly go to jail. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. It wasn't clickbait. There are some things mentioned in this lawsuit which, if it was to be taken up in a criminal case, Blair would be not in a good position. And given the fact that these details are being put into a civil case, I think if Blair loses this case, she could then face a criminal case against the state or against whoever is in charge of embezzlement. Because yes, embezzlement is something that has been mentioned throughout this case quite a lot because Oz mentioned it in his video last year when he came out and spoke about this entire situation. But yeah, we're going to put that aside for a second and just get into the first details in the factual allegations. Now, the first paragraph speaks about Blair's claim of defamation against Oz, which all came from the video Oz uploaded in September the 16th, 2023, titled Let's Talk. And yes, that is the same video that I just mentioned of where Oz, suggests things of he saw things in his friendship with Blair that could be described as embezzlement. The document then goes on to explain some of the details that Oz gave in his video about how he was supposedly coerced into signing a lot of suspicious documents that were kind of repackaged into repayments for financial support that Blair had given to Oz previously. And he also claims that Blair was using money from her businesses for personal uses without any actual business reasons. And this obviously comes into the whole argument of embezzlement because pretty much Blair would be taking money from her accounts and putting it into another account and displaying it as a business transaction when it absolutely, seemingly, according to this court document, was not. But the document then gets crazy when it goes on to state that Mr. Oz was pressured into signing these documents, and these documents pretty much being Blair using company funds of 9 Point Holders or Pyramid Entertainment LLC to pay for some expenses she had incurred in her personal relationships, with Blair clearly knowing that these payments were unrelated to her business, which obviously is textbook embezzlement. But obviously, it's not just embezzlement, it's coercing other individuals into engaging in said embezzlement by putting pressure onto them. Obviously, this starts to take this from a civil case into a actual criminal case because embezzlement is obviously a crime in pretty much any part of the world, and in America alone you can get 10 years in jail for embezzlement, and in cases of where the embezzled money was less than $1,000, it's only a year in jail. Well, what you're going to discover is the money that Blair has allegedly embezzled is far more than $1,000. And we will get into that, but we kind of need to go through everything chronologically here. So let's get into the next section, which states in section 15 that the main reason Oz made his original video against Blair was because he learned that Blair had put a pending foreclosure on his residence. Which again comes into what I mentioned earlier, that if a jury saw this, they would probably think to themselves, based on everything we're seeing so far, it's clearly a very angry, bitter ex just simply trying to ruin her ex's life. And that's only proven even further in the next section of where it gets onto the topic of censorship, as it starts to speak about how Blair tried to place a civil restraining order against Oz and others, specifically the individuals that were speaking up against her. And if a jury trial were to be granted in this case, obviously this would look really bad on Blair, because not only is this jury or possible jury now seen that she has tried to make this individual Oz homeless, but they are also now going to see that Blair then tried to censor that same individual theoretically, what she has done here is, well, not theoretically, what she has done here is she has tried to make someone be on the streets and then stop them from complaining about it or giving their story about how they ended up on the streets. And obviously, this is incredibly ironic considering Blair herself is literally a commentary YouTube channel that speaks about things on the internet where she gives her opinions and debates the moral, ethical dilemmas surrounding a lot of situations. I mean, it literally is, I don't know why I keep on saying literally, but it literally is one of the most ironic things that I've ever seen, and I genuinely do believe that a jury would see all of this and think, wow, this is a terrible, terrible individual. Because let's be real, we're all part of the general public. I'm just a guy that gives my opinion. You're somebody that watches, gives their opinion in the comment section, maybe makes their own post about it. And for the most part, well, pretty much the entire general public believe that Blair is in the wrong in this situation. And I struggle to see why a jury would also then not have the same opinion. And in section 18, it only continues with speaking about the silencing techniques, of where it states that Blair was intending to silence Oz and others from discussing her intertwined personal and professional relationships with her, which was subject of widespread public interest, particularly in the YouTube online community. And exactly that, the person who had made millions from giving their opinion on the internet did not want people to give their opinion on the internet. And honestly, that's something that I just can't get my head around. I recently discussed this on my podcast with Obese to Beast, which is called Over the Pond. If you want to go and subscribe to it. We just started episode 2 coming up very soon. But we discussed this, that this is just such a strange thing. Blair's whole handling of this entire situation still confuses me. It absolutely bamboozles me. And I don't say bamboozle lightly. How she thought she would get away with any of this, knowing that she is a commentary channel who critiques people and gives opinions on people, and not even with the argument of irony here or hypocrisy here, but just the fact that Blair would clearly understand how internet situations conclude. Blair knows what the general public thinks, how they act, and how they would see something like this and think, this is terrible, yet she still went ahead with everything and is still going ahead with everything to this day. I mean, it's just absolutely so confusing. But also, please subscribe to my podcast. Thank you very much. Over the Pond, link in the description. Thanks. But yeah, aside from me plugging my podcast, we now need to move into the conversation once again of embezzlement, where Blair's lawyers start to just, I keep on saying it, but they keep on getting spicy, man. Some of the things in this document, I'm reading it and I'm like, wow, I genuinely didn't expect this, and I don't think Blair did either. Because yeah, in these sections here, Oz's lawyers go more into talking about how Oz signed instruments of debt with Blair, and he was under the understanding that if he didn't sign these, Blair would pretty much be completely screwed due to a misuse of company assets, and that Blair had pretty much explained her need for Oz, and that she said that she would be in big trouble if Oz did not sign these documents. Basically, in short, from my understanding, this is emotional manipulation, i.e. coercion. It kind of seems that Blair was taking out every single thing that she could to emotionally manipulate her partner at the time into signing documents that would pretty much save her from being financially ruined. Which is only confirmed even further in section 21, where Oz's lawyers directly say that Oz was coerced and manipulated by Blair into signing these documents, stating that Blair drove Oz to her attorney's office and told him that signing these documents would mend their relationship, which obviously is the finest level of emotional manipulation. Oz was in a bit of a terrible relationship from what I can get the understanding of, given everything that's been said on social media over the years, with Blair. And it very much seems that Oz did actually want to mend that relationship, and Blair knew that and took advantage of that. And what I can basically see here, aside from all the legal shenanigans, is that Blair didn't value Oz. Blair did not value their relationship in terms of an emotional perspective. She just saw it as another financial asset, as a thing that could benefit her and her company. And that, aside from all of the legalities, is just really sad. The fact that she emotionally manipulated Oz into getting into this situation is just disgusting. But it also seems that from the very beginning, she was setting up the people around her to pretty much be in a situation where if they ever fell out, Blair could pretty much slam the financial hammer on them, which we have seen throughout the last 2 years. It very much shows that in this document, Blair, from the very beginning, was not this innocent bystander who got, I guess, corrupted by her own ego. It, to me personally, seems that Blair from the very beginning is the exact same person that we know her to be in 2024. And again, I really don't think that's a good conclusion to come to in Blair's case if a jury was approved for this case. Because obviously, any jury is going to see that and everything that we've gone through and come to a very similar conclusion, in my opinion. And some may argue, well, how do you know that? I know that because most humans have basic level empathy, and what we can see in this document shows that there is a individual who was in a vulnerable situation and they were emotionally coerced into doing things that they necessarily did not want to do. And I think that if a jury trial was in place, Blair, in terms of this civil case, would be absolutely screwed. But then we need to get into the legal, scenario here of this case going criminal. Because yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the possible embezzlements that may or may not have happened in this whole saga was not less than $1,000, but actually above $40,000. Because yeah, in section 26, it says that Blair provided a $40,000 payment to Oz in January 2021 from her company, and that was used to satisfy loan underwriting for Oz's purchase of the newly constructed home. Blair created and provided an invoice from 9 Point Holdings for computer construction and service-related work performed by Oz to document the payments. And later, however, Blair would include the $40,000 payment in an unwritten ledge of debt that she claimed Oz owed her and her company, and she used undue influence and pressure to coerce Oz into signing loan documents that would include that said $40,000 payment, along with numerous other amounts that were never itemized or identified. And yeah, obviously, this is just all absolutely mental from a legal perspective, but also from a moral perspective. The fact that she had used $40,000 or more over Oz's head as a way, in my opinion, to manipulate him, to silence him, to just... and I'm not going to really use this word lightly, but almost, well, definitely to abuse him is honestly despicable. But as I mentioned earlier, as you can see here, in the United States, people can receive a 10-year jail sentence for embezzlement, and it also states that if the amount is less than $1,000, they may face a year in jail. And the fee suggested here is obviously 40 or more times that. So God only knows what the jail sentence would be for Blair. But then it only gets worse in section 29, where it states that the debt randomly got inflated from $40,000 to $49,000, and then other debts that came from expenses for Blair's crypto farm and candle company were placed onto Oz's unwritten debts. I mean, this is genuine supervillain. This is something that I would expect from, I don't know, a loan shark. That's what I'm seeing here. Illuminaughtii, from my perspective and opinion, I should just say legally, definitely, this is all my opinion. Everything stated in this video is my opinion, not Oz's opinion, just my opinion. But from my opinion, I can see, like, this is like a gangster supervillain loan shark who is trying to manipulate everyone around them into doing what they want, into benefiting their pocket and them just in general. It is insane, and I truly do hope that no matter what happens in this case, this eventually goes criminal. Because yeah, this is a civil case, but genuinely, I don't think that the conclusion of this case necessarily matters, given the fact that these details are being spoken about in this court case. These details reflect possible criminal activity, and if these details, stumble upon the desk of somebody that works at an embezzlement task defense force or whatever you call it, and they see this, they're going to start investigating regardless of what the context of the conclusion of this case turns out to be, and they could possibly take criminal proceedings against Blair that could lead to an actual jail sentence. Again, in my personal opinion. And you can't really say that I'm exaggerating or even clickbaiting here. From what I can see from the argument that Oz's lawyers are arguing, this is all seemingly criminal activity. So why would a government enforcement agent that works in, an embezzlement agency see this and just happily ignore it? No, I don't think that they would ignore the millionaire businesswoman practicing allegedly embezzlement. Especially when you get into the fact that in Section 35, it speaks about Blair's coercion, manipulation, and overbearing deceit. And the rest of the section then speaks about the constant pressure that Blair would put on Oz throughout all of the time that they were in a relationship. I would think that someone out there that works in the embezzlement task force agency, whatever you want to call it, would see that and think not only are they engaging in illegal activity, but they are emotionally manipulating and coercing other individuals into aiding them in that activity, which from my research would only increase the sentence that Blair could possibly get if this went criminal. I mean, look at some of the business expenses that Blair has been accused of making, buying handbags, jewelry, and a BMW Z4. Now, okay, the BMW maybe can be argued to be a legitimate business expense because, yeah, it's a work car. She's got to drive to her attorney's office where she then gets the attorney to silence everybody and financially ruin their lives. And maybe the handbag can be argued because, it contains the documents that were used to silence all of the people around her. But the jewelry? I just can't really think of an argument to why jewelry would be a business expense. Like, even if you want to make the argument of, a YouTuber would wear clothes in a video or get a nice quirky haircut, that could be a business expense because they are presenting themselves and they want to present themselves in the best possible way, because you could argue someone wouldn't want to watch them if they look like a greasy sack of slime. But Blair doesn't show her face in any of her videos. So why would expensive jewelry be a legitimate business expense? To me personally, I just can't really make a valid argument. And based on that, I genuinely do believe that maybe she could get investigated. Her company, Pyramid Entertainment LLC, could get investigated, and it could lead to criminal proceedings. And look, I'm all for spending money, but I genuinely just can't really justify a business expense for a ring, an earring, a necklace. I'm not really sure what, Blair spends her money on in terms of jewelry, but I'm sure it's absolutely lovely. But in terms of the perspective of, the government, I don't think they're going to be too happy. And in Section 58, it gets even more interesting, where it states that Blair and her companies each receive benefits at Oz's expense under circumstances that would make it unjust for Blair and her company to retain the benefit without compensation to Oz. Further, due to the failure of Blair and her lawyer or business entities to itemize an account for the accounts included in the deed of trust and promissory notes Mr. Oz was forced to sign, the debt secured by such deeds of trust should be subject to an equitable account, and Oz allowed to leave to amend to set forth all appropriate claims for accession or reformation of such instruments of debts. And I understand if a lot of you don't actually understand what that means, but in translation, equitable accounting is something that Oz's lawyers have requested in this case, and pretty much what that is a court-ordered examination of Blair and her company's accounts. And I think This is a really smart move, given all of the conversation surrounding illegal activity, actually forcing Blair to hand over her bank statements or documents or accounts so a third party can analyze those accounts is massive in this civil case, but also possible future criminal cases, because if it is found in this case that yes, embezzlement has actually taken place, then obviously a criminal case would separately start as well, because yeah, criminal activity has taken place and has been shown after Blair handed over her documents and accounts, which obviously is absolutely huge, and it does play very much, in my opinion, to Oz's recent update, which we will get into. But then I just want to carry on with where it mentions also that they are asking for the recession or reformation of such instruments of debt, which pretty much is Oz's lawyers requesting that the debt that Oz has from Blair is either completely cancelled or just modified to reflect fairness. And all of this is genuinely a masterclass, in my opinion, from Oz's lawyer. They know that this is going to worry Blair. They know that she is going to be thinking about the possibility of an actual third party looking into her accounts, and they know that that is going to make her backtrack, which recently it seems that she definitely has. But in getting towards the end of the document, it starts to get, really sad in section 73, where it states that the conduct of Blair has been outrageous and would be intolerable in any civilized society. And there is a large redacted section of this document, and I believe this is because of something very, very personal that is mentioned throughout the document. And I'm not going to speculate, I'm not going to do my research into this, but I think this is another case of trying to win a possible jury's hearts by playing on the heartstrings of just showing how deplorable Blair is. That's only going to get the jury even more on Oz's side. And again, I should just say, I don't know if a jury trial has been approved. It is just a request and it could be denied. But I think nevertheless, this is a very smart thing to put in this document, because at the same time, it will also play into the judge's hearts. Because yes, whilst it's probably better for us to have a jury of multiple people, a judge will still have some level of empathy in their decision. And based on what is being described here and what has been redacted, I can only imagine something truly terrible took place between Blair and Oz. And I don't want to speculate on the finer details of that, but I can understand why this is in this lawsuit. And it is just really sad, because from what I can see from everything in this document, it's very much a case of Oz has been emotionally taken advantage of in pretty much every single scenario by Blair. And with that, it does take us into the prayers for relief, which, if you don't know what that means, pretty much it is what Oz and his lawyers are requesting in terms of compensation for all of the things that they've argued throughout this document. And prayer number 1 being a quiet title and deed nullification, which basically is Oz's lawyers asking for the court to establish Oz as the sole owner of the property in all of this big debate and remove all claims that Blair may have. Which, yeah, I think is a totally fair thing for Oz and his lawyers to request, because this property has been something that has been weaponized by Blair over the years. It's been something that she has used to financially and emotionally ruin Oz over the years. And I think that a court just allowing Oz to actually have his home would be a very good thing and a very fair thing. And then prayer number 2 is again asking for an equitable account, which is, yeah, as I said, Oz requesting for a detailed analysis to be done into Blair's accounts and funds mentioned throughout this lawsuit. Which, yeah, is obviously a smart reason for all of the reasons that I previously discussed. And then prayer 3 is Oz requesting damage compensation for unjust enrichment. Prayer 4 is requesting damage compensation for damages for emotional and privacy violations. And prayer 5 is additional relief that the court may find fair in the case of what his lawyers have been arguing throughout all of this. And yeah, honestly, I think all of these prayers for relief are completely reasonable and absolutely fair. And I also think they would be terrible for Blair. Because one, it would financially ruin her. In Oz's recent video, he states that so far he has spent around $80,000 on this lawsuit. And if this lawsuit was to go on for even longer, that fee would go up and up and up. And then take into account the emotional turmoil that this would have taken on Oz and everyone else involved in this lawsuit. I think when you equate everything into compensation for damages of multiple reasonings, Blair could possibly be into debt of hundreds of, or if not millions of dollars when it comes to paying compensation for all of the individuals involved in this court case. This could absolutely ruin Blair. But again, not just for financial reasons, but also reason number 2 of yes, this could all put her in legal jeopardy. And as I keep on saying, that's only proven in Oz's recent video, a quick lawsuit update. Because in this video, he briefly speaks about some of the updates, and I find it really interesting that in this video, he states that basically, in part 1 of the court case, he tried to negotiate with Blair, and she outright rejected that.
Part 1 was released June 1st. Negotiations were attempted, even extended from June 7th to June 14th, but ultimately failed.
Now, this is interesting because then Oz goes on to state that after this, he then went on to file his counterclaim, which pretty much means countersuing Blair. And after it was accepted, because yes, this claim has been accepted in the court, it can now be used and argued against. Now it has been accepted by the judge. Blair mysteriously wants to go into mediation via a third party.
After they failed, my legal team began the production of my counterclaims. My counterclaims needed an additional extension of time as my legal team wanted to make sure as many of their I's and T's were dotted and crossed, putting this into late July. We needed to add additional parties, pushing it further into August for any hope of a release. On top of this, my counterclaims now needed approval from the judge to add these additional parties to the counterclaims. The judge did not accept the counterclaims until around September 28th. I wanted to ensure that my counterclaims were approved by the judge before speaking publicly on them, which led to the massive delay. I didn't want to be in a position to retract my counterclaims, especially with the sensitive subject matter included within them. I also did not want to give Blair an expected release, as I was personally fearful of a gag order. After the judge accepted my counterclaims, and because we were already over a year into the lawsuit, both parties have mutually agreed to reattempt mediation. However, this time, it will be conducted by a third party.
Now, this is particularly very interesting for multiple reasons. Reason number 1 being, Blair is clearly scared. She knows that she is struggling here. The case against her is massive, but not just in terms of, again, a civil perspective, but a legal perspective. I don't think Blair expected Oz to make the argument of embezzlement as much as he did in his counterclaim. If anything, it pretty much seemed to be his main claim, and I think that's why she has gone into mediation. I think that's why she probably wants this over and done with, because this, if it got bigger and bigger and bigger, if her embezzlement was argued in an actual court case, I think that that could, end on the desk of a certain, embezzlement enforcement officer. They take a look at that and think, we need to start investigating this regardless of what actually is concluded in this civil case. So this, to me, whilst it does seem nice that Blair is actually cooperating, it is, for me personally, a very, very sneaky tactic. It's clear that she knows that there is no positive way out of this. If this is concluded after December 5th that Oz speaks about in this video after mediation, it doesn't matter, because Blair now knows that the allegations of embezzlement against her and the specific details of how much money is being possibly embezzled or was embezzled, she knows that's that's out there now, and she wants to get away from this as quick as possible, in my personal opinion, and that's why she has now gone into mediation with Oz. It's honestly really, really sneaky, but given everything we've seen throughout everything so far in this story, are you really surprised? Because I personally am not. Now, yes, there is a possibility that mediation goes wrong and they don't come to some form of fair, conclusion, and the court case does actually proceed, and that would be even worse for Blair. If they don't settle after a third-party mediation, I would be shocked if Blair won this case and if it didn't go absolutely terribly for her. Because let's be real, this has just been an absolute car crash from the very beginning for Blair, and it is very clear that she is scared, but also I don't think that Blair can afford this case for that much longer. Oz in his video mentions that if this all fails, this could go on for years, and I really don't think that Blair has the money to support her claims against Oz. Because yes, Oz has the community backing him, and whilst it is still very stressful, it's probably nice knowing that at least the community are there, whereas Blair, her YouTube channel's abandoned, she's not posting on any social medias, and also I've made the discovery that even her other companies outside of social media are not doing well, or are just outright no longer existing. For example, her candle company, the website is no longer available. I tried accessing it and you just can't get on it, and the Instagram page that it has is not active whatsoever, and the Facebook page also is not active whatsoever. So it seems that her businesses, even outside of social media, are failing, and I account that to Blair does not have much money left. And I don't think that Blair will want to continue this for much longer. So even if mediation, fails, I think that this lawsuit won't continue much longer because Blair simply cannot afford it. Overall, to conclude this situation, this is absolutely one of the messiest scenarios I think I've ever seen on social media. And I do just want to say, please do everything you can to support Oz. Because even if he does, get a really good conclusion from mediation, they settle and it all ends there and then, we can't take away from the fact that Blair has emotionally tortured this guy for over a year now, and has emotionally tortured other individuals out there such as Wonderstruck, Felix, and probably many, many others. So I don't think a settlement changes anything, and honestly, even if a settlement does happen, I really wouldn't be surprised if a criminal investigation starts and Blair possibly in the future faces some level of criminal conviction. Again, this is all my opinion, and this video is complete just, analysis from my perspective. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge, I'm not here saying that Blair absolutely has broken all of these laws. I'm just saying, from my perspective, I can see a lot of suspicious stuff, and if certain things were proven, then yes, it would be now a criminal case. Overall, Blair, in every single angle, is just absolutely finished. But yes, my friends, that is the ending of the video. Thank you so much for coming along. And if you want to hear me speak more about this, as I said earlier, I have done a recent podcast where we spoke about Blair for a large section of that podcast. But also, I would really appreciate it if you went and subscribed to the podcast. We speak about so many other things on there, not just iilluminaughtii, but we speak about our personal lives. We speak about, internet topics, video games, television shows, all the things that you could possibly want to hear about. We speak about it, me and Obese to Beast. So please go to the link in the description and subscribe. It probably will also be up next. But yes, also, if you could, give me your opinions in the comment section down below, because, I may have got a thing not necessarily wrong here, but maybe my legal analysis wasn't perfect. So if you are a lawyer, I would really appreciate clarifications in the comment section to just let me and my audience know what you personally think is going on here. But also to the general audience, if you want to give me your opinion down below, that would be amazing. Please like this video, follow my Instagram at inabber, and also please subscribe. Thank you so much for coming along. That is the ending of the video. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out, everybody. Have a great week.